set the objective of identifying, where we've set the objective of identifying a couple of issues around which our countries and our experiences can be useful to the rest, and creating a space where we can deliver a presentation on that experience and those lessons learned, so the rest can engage and ask questions and maybe even create a closer link, even though we've all been partners of the project for years now, but maybe even create that closer peer-to-peer link if needed, and if you see that it's interesting. I was announcing this at the beginning of the session. We are going to record the session for the sake of those partners that will not be able to join us today. But the objective is not necessarily to upload this this recording and make it public, but to use this session in the future as a learning curve, as a potential material for creating dissemination communication products. And I wanted to just announce that in case you are wondering why we are recording this session. Today's session, and I'm going to begin introducing today's session. Today's session is hosted by Dominican Republic and by Zambia. So we have with us from Dominican Republic, Maisel Cairo. She has been coordinating the G77 and China on negotiations relating to ACE, to Action for Climate Empowerment. And I had the honor of meeting Maciel in COP27. And we have Aurelius Nkonde from Zambia. Aurelius is going to share with us some of the experiences that Zambia has been generating with regards to climate finance. Today's session is, as I was mentioning, the first of what we are planning to have at least 3 South-South cooperation exchanges during the year, where we have a couple of countries hosting the session and delivering on their lessons learned and experiences for the rest, and then creating a space for everyone to be able to have a conversation. So this is the first of those events focused, as I've mentioned, on ACE, on Action for Climate Empowerment. Maciel is going to share with us the experience of the Dominican Republic in internalizing the ACE approach in the national policies. And it is also focused on climate finance and the experiences that Zambia and that Aurelius will share with us around those issues. So today's session is focused on a presentation. We'll have presentations from both Maciel and Aurelius, and then we'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with everyone. And if the time allows, we were planning on having a teamwork where we potentially use a whiteboard and identify how the obstacles that are being discussed in the session can also be overcome through some of the lessons that we'll be identifying throughout the session as well. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Maciel. So Maciel, you can take us through the experiences of the Dominican Republic around ACE. Thank you very much for joining.
Okay, thank you, Andres. Thank you so much, Impulsouth, for facilitating this space for a closed space for discussion. I do want to go right in and have a disclaimer. Are you guys hearing me okay?
I hear you with some echo.
Okay, let me check. I'll do it. All right. I don't have my headset, so I am home alone, so probably. But if that is a problem for everyone to hear me out, I can try and find some headset, if that's okay.
I think we can hear you. Okay, can everyone hear Maciel?
Yeah.
I'll take that as a yes.
Okay, great. So just as a disclaimer, before I get right into it, I do need to jet off at 11 because we have an internal informal discussion for the ACE dialogue, and that is with the ACE national focal points, and that's at 11. So at 11, if we go past 11, I have to sign off and get to that meeting. Okay. So as far as my presentation, I do want to say that I see someone here that I've already met at the council, Coraima Estrella. I think she's from the Dominican Republic, and she went once there to a meeting at the council and I met her. We are talking about the same person, right? Okay, so I'm glad to see that we have other people here from our country who are engaging and trying to participate in this type of spaces. So let me get right onto my presentation. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I have made like a compiled list of the achievements that we've had in our country as far as transversalization of action for climate empowerment in public policies and a little bit of the work that we've done. But before I get into it, it's important to understand that one of the key aspects that have been facilitating this joint effort is the fact that the government structure for climate change is a council, and that council is joined by all types of institutions. So we are in itself a transversalized institution. We are a cross-cutting institution. We have the Ministry of Finance, we have the Ministry of Planning, we have the Ministry of Energy, we have the Ministry of Tourism. So a lot of ministries are involved in the work that the council does. So that is a key aspect that I like to highlight, because the work that the council does is not a work, an island on its own. So it's important to share that, because sometimes a lot of countries don't understand how is it that we as a small island are able to move. But it's because we internally tend to have a lot of support. So starting off on the first thing that we could find that actually involves climate action, we conducted our first survey of knowledge, practices, and attitudes that people have about climate change. And that survey was, well, I have noted here the support. And that survey was conducted for people aged 17 and older. And what this survey found is that a lot of people were not aware of what climate change was in 2012. A lot of them sort of had an idea of what climate change was. A lot of them couldn't really understand what was causing climate change, and they thought it was just the nature changing because it's a natural thing that's going to happen, and that it had no human intervention whatsoever. And so what that did is that led us to the creation of a national learning strategy with focus on climate change, low emissions, and climate resilient development. And that was also thanks to the support of the UNCC Learn program. So international cooperation has always been another key aspect on how the Dominican Republic has been able to move forward. So once you have the baseline of information of what the people think, what the people feel, and where are sort of those gaps and those breaches that we needed to close, then we were focused on getting together to work on the education strategy. And we were actually part of the delegations that pushed forward on the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, which is the article that supports all ACE related activities. I'm sorry, I'm getting a message that the battery's low, so I'm just going to stop the video. Then we had We had another material that was produced, but this was specifically for teachers, because obviously if we want our teachers to teach kids, we need to make sure that they have information readily at hand, that it's updated, that is based on science, that is based on research. And again, this was also possible due to the close work of international cooperation. And so in this material that we have, and I think we have this material, I think it's in a digital format. So of all the materials that I'm speaking today, if anyone is interested in having the document, like the whole document in itself, please feel free to reach out and I can share it with you. So we had that material for teachers, because what we were trying to do is that we were trying to push forward that the climate change education is being inserted in the school curricula, but at all levels. So what we're trying to do in our country is that we're trying to have children learn about climate change, but since very early on, up until whenever they are having education, even if they're in college, that they are able to learn change. It's not.
We're listening to you. It's okay. Your connection.
No, I was trying to change the slide. It wasn't changing. Okay. So then we created a special program with local organizations that was focused on teaching school teachers for the tertiary level, right? And so we had a bit over 300 school teachers that were taught with this specific program. Because like I said, we are trying to tackle all cycles of education. So we had that focus and we see that it worked, because for the past, I would say 5 years, a lot of young people have really gotten interested in learning about climate change, in understanding about climate change, in learning about biology, in understanding vulnerability, in understanding about climate risk, etc. Then we went ahead and we had the implementation of a training programs to help, again, teachers to improve their teaching, but this was on a more of a school level, and this was also a broader program, and this was encapsulated in what was the program UNCC Learn, again, which was a great help for our country. So we had over 3,000 and plus teachers that that completed the program successfully, and that also came up with an idea that I will share later on. Then we also had more materials developed, which was a guide of study for freshwater ecosystems. This is an entire booklet that has activities and that has guiding questions and homeworks for children, so that they can understand the value that those freshwater ecosystems have in countries such as ourselves, and to also try to awaken in them that they feel empowered to always take action and to always look out for those things and to always have ideas of how within their household they can to tackle climate change. And then another key aspect that has always helped the Dominican Republic into moving forward in the aspects of climate empowerment is having a sustained presence in the negotiation for our big negotiation group, which is the G77 plus China. This is something that is not easy for all the countries. I know that a lot of the countries are not part of the negotiations because the economics of it all, and having a delegate negotiating for that subject in particular, sometimes a country has other priorities and they cannot have someone there. But having a sustained and maintained presence in the negotiations, both in COP and the SB and FBI, has also been a key aspect to always stay on top of the subject, always stay on top of what's happening, and to always see and share with possible donors what we have, but also what we need, showcasing what we do, showcasing what we already have, trying to get replication of whatever program we had, trying to access new funding to have new initiatives here. That is also very important. I think that not only it doesn't have to be a government mandate for a delegate to understand that once they are in that type of platform, they need to make sure that they are very awake and their ears are very, very, I would say, paying attention to what is being said, to what is being discussed, because you always need to be on the lookout for new funding, for new synergies that you can discover with a country that you perhaps didn't think you had similarities, but at the end of the day, South-South cooperation is going to be the way forward to a lot of us countries. If we cannot access big funds, we need to work amongst ourselves, find out what we have, our similarities, if we have similar gaps, if we have similar breaches that we can tackle and help each other grow and move forward. And then the last milestone that we had is that we updated the survey that we had over 10 years ago. And then with the findings of those surveys, we were able to develop an online platform that you can interact with the information, you can consult the information, and then that way, because you can have data very disaggregated, what you can do is that you can make sure that whatever public policy that you propose is current and is within what the public needs and it's within what the public believes. For example, in the, as soon as I stop sharing my screen, I'm gonna try and find the access to show you guys a little bit. So what we can do in this particular tool is that we can say, for example, what does a 14-year-old, because this survey, due to social media and mainstream of information and such, we were able to amplify the sample for younger people. So the first survey was for teenagers of 17, and this was starting at 14. So if I go to the dashboard, I can find out what a 14-year-old boy who is uneducated and lives in a rural area thinks about climate change. So then I can have something that tackles that specific demographic. But then I can also find out what a 35-year-old female who is educated but who is religious and lives in the urban area feels about climate change or about the government or about access to information. And I think that that is something that we are trying to display now in the SBIs if it is picked up, because this is something that I think is going to be very useful, especially for developing countries, to see exactly what people think about specific aspects. So I think that in the interest of time, I have plenty of time. I think in the interest of time, that is the best summary that I can provide. But if you guys have any questions, I am here to discuss.
Thank you very much, Maciel, for your presentation. I have a lot of questions myself, but I'd like to open the floor to see if anybody has questions before we go into the next presentation. You can just raise your hand.
Just raise your hand.
Okay, so Maciel, can you stop sharing your screen, please? Okay, while people are thinking about their questions, I'll maybe just pose a couple to Maciel before we go to the next presentation. Maciel, from my experience, one of the most difficult things to do in our countries is to generate institutional arrangements between the Ministry of Environment, which is usually the institution that handles climate change, and other sectors. And for the implementation of these types of activities, I assume very strong institutional arrangements were put in place between environment and the Ministry of Education. So I wanted to ask you what you've learned around that relation between the ministry or the environment sector and education. Usually it's difficult to have other sectors prioritize climate change at a level in which you've shown, including changes to schools, curriculums, potential priorities around what schools are teaching and removing for climate change to have that slot. So I wanted to ask that question to you, see if you have anything to tell us.
Yeah, sure. It's a very valid question, and it's also an important question. Everything that we have been doing has always been moving in very slow manners in that sense. But the council has always been working towards having, first of all, those arrangements that you mentioned, but like I said in the beginning of the presentation, because we are a cross-cutting institution, it's easier for us, like the government instruction makes it easier for us to move forward. Oh, Sarah's here. Well, Sarah is one of the pioneers working in Action for the Environment. So she, I know, is ready to answer any questions if we have them, because I actually took over after Sarah became a lot more occupied with other things. So I can say that I learned a lot from her.
Thank you, Maciel. I see both Sarah and Boubacar. Sarah, would you like to complement Maciel's response?
Yes, first of all, I would like to tell Maciel that I'm very proud of her presentation. I liked it a lot. I came in a little bit later, but I did get to see the end of the presentation, and I really enjoyed it. As far as the question that was asked by Andres is concerned, just as Maciel said, since we are not only Ministry of Environment, but we're the Council of Climate Change, we are an institution that holds different members. And one of the members is especially the Ministry of Education. And we've been working alongside the Ministry of Education for a long time now. I think Maciel mentioned that we did a lot of work since 2011 for the Ministry of Education, so they could include climate change specifically, education of climate change specifically in their curriculum. So this is something that has been done through the council. We've been working with them with some other practical actions as well. And we also work with, for example, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in terms of the coordination of G77 for Action for Climate Empowerment. So we've had this coordination since 2012 for when the Doha work program started. And it's been very exciting for us to see the succession of the Doha work program become what is now. So we're very eager to see what goes on in the subsidiary body sessions now in Bonn. We're already getting ready. I don't know if anybody wants to come in and say some of their expectations in this. Maybe Jonathan wants to say something. I can see that Coraima is joining us as well. She's also from the Dominican Republic, from the Impulsouth Solutions Lab. So as you see, we've been very engaged in these Action for Climate Empowerment actions for a while now. Of course, the Ministry of Environment has a big part to play in these matters. We have a law of education and communication for just environmental issues right now. And that's being handled by the Direction of Environmental Education from the Ministry of Environment, joined with in a joint work with the Ministry of Education. So it's still a long way to go, but we've traveled through a long road now. And as Maciel said, if you have any other questions or you would like to have any other joint sessions, please let us know and we'll be happy to join. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I wish I had time to ask all of the rest of my questions. I'll give the floor now to Boubacar. I see you with your hand up, Boubacar.
Yeah, so thank you, Andreas, and I would like to thank Marcial for her great presentation, which show us some information about what is happening in the Republic of Dominican regarding the awareness on climate change. So it's a great experience, this kind of training for teachers. So in order to change the curricula and also to train students. Yeah, so to train students. So here we haven't yet organized that kind of trainings. So what we are doing in Niger is to change the curricula of some institutions, some universities, so that the students will be trained. So for her case, I would like to know if the impact of the teachers training on the awareness on climate change has been evaluated in the Dominican Republic. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bakar, for your question. That's really a great question. And that is something that we are working on. That's actually why we updated the survey that we had 10 years ago, because we wanted to have a mechanism that would allow us to monitor and evaluate precisely what you're saying, the impact that these training programs have had in the country and how that has then translated to the knowledge that students have acquired. So yes, the survey in itself is an evaluation document. We can say that the impact has been positive. The perception of climate change has changed significantly over the course of the work that we've done for 10 years. And a lot of people are more interested. A lot of people feel more empowered. A lot of people are a lot more engaged, but also the way that social media has been exploding for the last years. And the reason of people being able to access information almost instantaneously has also increased the level of awareness that people have in climate change. So it is important for institutions that work with climate change to have presence in all types of media, not only printed media, written media like newspapers or like radio stations, but also on your social media platforms. But I do want to mention something that I did not put in the slide, but that we also have done in the country, and is that through internal institutional arrangements and the support of the private sector, because you can never stop trying to engage the private sector to come on board, we have been able to have short programs specifically trained for climate change professionals, people that work in climate change or related fields. Last year, we had a course on climate and diplomatic negotiations that was very, very successful. We were also able to participate. Some of the young people here in the country were able to participate in a program which was called Operación COP.
I think Maciel lost her connection.
Yes, I thought I was the only one who lost her, but I think due to time, we'll go ahead and move to the second presentation. And if we have time, then we'll, after that presentation, we can have Maciel come back to complement her answer. So I'll now give the floor to Aurelius, who's going to tell us a little bit about the experience that Zambia has been generating around climate finance. So Aurelius, we're all yours. Can you hear us?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. I'll try to project or rather share my screen. Thank you very much. I will have a quick overview in terms of climate finance in Zambia. I'll basically talk about an overview from an African perspective, and then I'll delve into climate finance, basically from our side as a country, Zambia. So in terms of an outline, or rather an overview of what I would be looking at, I'll basically give a quick landscape in terms of climate finance from a general perspective, and then I'll get to look at GCF funding. I would want to give the picture as how it sits within the African context. Then I'll get to look at some of the institutional arrangements that we have within the country, as Zambia. And then the programming in terms of climate change and how it has evolved over the years in Zambia. And then I will get to GCF financing, as well as some of the key milestones that we've achieved as a country. So in terms of an overview, this is just to give a quick snapshot in terms of the climate finance landscape. Some of you might be familiar with this, screen or this landscape. It basically ultimately just indicates that most of the financing, that is available for access is with the private sector. So we realize that there are a number of different financing instruments that are available in form of grants, debt, equity, as well as blended financing. But of course, some of these financing modalities or aspects ultimately, trickle down into, it gives a dimension or a picture that shows that most of this financing is more heavy from the private sector point of view. Roughly about 272 million US dollars is basically what goes towards, or rather is available in the private sector space. But also it's important to notice that only 22 million US dollars is going towards adaptation, but as well as on the other hand, you find that a heavy 436 million US dollars is going, or rather is it billion US dollars is going towards mitigation. So I just wanted to give a quick perspective in terms of some of the financing instruments that you'd find available. In terms of sources, mostly you'd find that these resources are coming mostly from government budgets, as well as from different multilateral, bilateral engagements, climate funds that are available. It can be private equity also, venture capital, and other instruments that are available for financing. So how much, of course, is available then from this landscape or from this perspective, from the whole entire total of about 463 billion over the years? We realized that from around about 2011, there was something like 364 billion that was available for financing. But over the years, this amount has seen a rise to around about 472 billion in 2015. And as of 2016, we had something like 463 billion US dollars available for climate change activities. But it's important also to notice that roughly about 54% of this financing that is available, that was available in 2016, was from private sector. So from the onset, I must make mention that it is important to realize and understand that as developing countries, we need not to just completely focus on public financing or from the GCF or GEF resources, but rather also ensure how we can, leverage on private sector finance. Then when you get down to Africa in terms of summary, this is just a picture to show how we are accessing resources from the GCF perspective. This slide simply indicates, as of 2023 February, it indicates how as African countries we are accessing funds from the GCF. So there was a total funding available of about 11.43 billion US dollars. But then out of that, total investments from the GCF that went to projects in Africa were roughly around 4.3 billion, which represents about 38%. But then GCF resources for Africa that were accessed through internationally accredited entities, were around 3.3 billion US dollars, which represents about 78% of these resources were accessed using international or internationally accredited institutions. But then when we come to regionally accredited institutions, this was around just 14%. West of nationally accredited institutions, only about 8% were able to access these resources. Now, this gives you a picture that we do have a challenge, even as African countries, to access resources from mechanisms like the GCF. If we are to access these resources, mostly is through internationally accredited institutions. So some of the questions that we want to then address, that we are trying to address even as Africa or even as a country, Zambia, is to find out or understand why we are failing to access resources from the GCF, mostly even for readiness funds. A good example is that there was about 486 million US dollars available in 2022, but we were only able to access as Africa around about 143.4 million US dollars, giving out a balance of about 342.6 million US dollars, which we did not access. So mostly the issue is around the fact that there are capacity limitations to prepare GCF readiness proposals and to implement them. But at the same time, mostly you'd find that some of the feedback that we've been receiving, even as a country as Zambia, is around the issue of the climate rationale. So most of the projects that we then submit would have challenges to justify or provide a clear climate rationale that would then access resources from these funding or financing mechanisms. So I thought it was important for me to give this perspective from an African perspective, that we do still have a challenge in terms of accessing resources, mostly because most of our African institutions are not yet accredited with the GCF. If we are to access resources, we have to use internationally accredited institutions, which also becomes, it has also its own limitations and challenges. Now, bringing it down to Zambia, just basically a quick overview in terms of our programming as a country. Over the years, from say 2000 thereabout, we have done a number of things and activities. We did our first national communication round about 2000 thereabout, and then we submitted that, which also culminated into between the period 2000-2005. We did a number of research activities around the impacts of climate change on hydropower, in this case on the Zambezi Basin. In the years around 2006 to 2010, we did establish our CDM DNA mechanism or institution that looks at carbon market projects. In this case, then it was CDM projects. We also established a climate change facilitation unit in 2009, which did the initial works around climate change. Within that period, we ended up also doing our climate change strategy and did our climate change needs assessment. We also did one of our milestone documents that has informed most of our climate programming in Zambia. We did the National Climate Change Response Strategy, which identified the key sectors that require addressing or that require our attention in terms of climate change action and measures within the country. Round about in 2011 to 2015, we did our technology leads assessment as a country. We also established an institution which was called an Interim Climate Change Secretariat, which paved way to the establishment of the Climate Change Department in 2018. Around about 2016, up to date, we've done a number of activities. Also, we've developed our RED+ strategy and the forest investment program or plan. That basically we use for purposes of attracting investment in the forest sector. We also did develop our NDC in 2016, which prioritized sustainable forest management, sustainable agriculture, renewable energy and energy efficiency as our key priority areas where we required investment for purposes of mitigation as well as adaptation. But at the same time, one of our milestone achievements was that we did establish a coordinating framework, which is basically our current standing institutional arrangements in terms of coordinating climate change within the country. Because in the past, you'd find that each sector was doing its own activities with regards to climate change. So in 2018, we did then establish a coordinating mechanism for coordinating climate change, which has at the topmost the Council of Ministers, a steering committee of permanent secretaries. Then at the technical level, there is a technical committee of technical people from all the different line sectors that are related to issues to do with climate change. The other important point that has helped the country in terms of access to climate finance is the fact that we've managed to, as of 2021 to 2022, we managed to accredit one of our commercial banks, which is the Zambia National Commercial Bank, with the Green Climate Fund, with a threshold of about $250 million for purposes of onward lending to private sector institutions. We also managed to accredit with the GCF, our Development Bank of Zambia, also with a threshold of around about $50 million for purposes of acting as the direct access entity to the GCF. So those are some of the key milestone achievements that we've had over the years. In terms of major policy instruments that are also helping us to access some of resources and also creating an enabling environment for purposes of bilateral engagements and also engaging with multilateral organizations, is we have a number of policy instruments that guide our processes. Just as of 2022, we launched the 8th National Development Plan, which has a dedicated pillar on environmental sustainability. This pillar also enshrines a number of environmental aspects in terms of biodiversity, land degradation, considering also climate change, as well as other environmental matters, feeding into the sustainable development goals. We also have the National Policy on Climate Change, which was launched in 2016, but currently we are actually reviewing this policy to ensure that we incorporate some of the dimensions that have changed internationally. For instance, we want to also incorporate some of the dynamics that have happened around the carbon markets. So we are reviewing the national policy on climate change. This is the instrument that basically provides or gives us the coordinating mechanisms of climate change. We did also, I did mention the climate change response strategy, which is one of the governing documents that we use that identifies specific sectors that need intervention. We did submit our nationally determined contribution. In this case, we did even submit our updated NDC. As a country, we do have a climate change gender action plan. We are in the process of developing our climate change bill, in this case, the legal framework that would guide our interventions as a country in terms of climate change. Then we launched also in 2021, we did launch the green bond guidelines. These were launched through the Ministry of Finance. I must mention that we do have a robust network, or rather we do coordinate and work together with a number of different key ministries. For example, we work quite a lot with the Ministry of Finance. They're the ones who also spearheaded the process on developing the green bond guidelines, working together with the Securities Exchange Commission in Zambia and the Bank of Zambia. Not only that, this also culminated into the development and launch of the Capital Markets Master Plan, which has also ensured that it looks at aspects of how we can green our investments in the country and access different kinds of impact investments, as well as different kinds of capital that are aligned with climate change, as well as any other green investments. Remember, I talked about the fact that there is a lot of capital that is available from the private sector. So this Capital Markets Master Plan has been developed for purposes of trying to ensure that we access some of those resources that are, aligned with the private sector. We also launched interim guidelines for carbon markets. We did look at the aspect that as a country, we want to use carbon markets as one of our financing mechanisms for climate change. But then we didn't want to wait until the bill is the legal framework is enacted, because at times this process might be long. We also didn't want to wait until maybe agreements are completed around Article 6.4, for instance, on carbon markets. But we then already looked at what guidelines can we use because we did have quite a number of applications that are coming through. We have a lot of partners that want to work with us with respect to the carbon markets. So we then developed and came up with the interim guidelines that would guide us of how, as a country, would then play out or interact with the carbon markets. So we have the interim guidelines for carbon markets in Zambia. Then we are in the process of also developing a green growth strategy, because as a country, we have, remember I talked about the 8th National Development Plan, which has a dedicated pillar on environmental sustainability. So as a country, we are trying to transition into a low carbon development and a green economy. But then as we transition into a green economy, we would want to clearly have a clear roadmap of how this transition would be. But at the same time, we are promoting economic growth, working together with the private sector, financing institutions, the Development Bank of Zambia, as well as different commercial banks. But then this growth should be done in a green way. So we're using the political will that is currently available, we were given the directive to ensure that we develop a green growth strategy that would guide our transition into a green economy. This one is basically looking at how a number of areas. We're looking at resource efficiency, We're looking at social inclusion. We're also looking at aspects of how we can promote renewable energy and energy efficiency. Some of the different instruments that we are trying to focus on and look at as a country, from the capital markets side, we're looking at a number of sustainable, responsible investments. In this case, we're looking at equity markets. We also look at aspects of impact investment that we also mostly you'd find this being propelled mostly by the private sector. But as a government, we do also ensure that we provide the necessary enabling environment. I talked about the green bond guidelines that were launched, because as a country, we anticipate to see how best we can launch out green bonds within the country. Then we are also leveraging on the capital markets master plan that was launched and see how best we can use different capital markets for purposes of accessing that much available private funds for climate change. We are also using some of the mechanisms available under the UNFCCC process. In this case, we're looking at the carbon markets, we look at the GCF resources, GEF resources, LDCF resources, as well as we are open to also have transactions under Article 6, in this case, it-most transactions. So these are some of the areas that we are looking at as a country to access some of these resources. Just to give a quick snapshot and overview of how much or how we have fared over the years, I've split some of the funds that we've accessed over the years into these different sectors: the health sector, disaster risk reduction, environmental sector, water sector, the agriculture sector, as well as the energy sector. So within the health sector, we've been, over the years, we've been able to access around about $2.6 million US. In terms of DRR, we've been able to access even more, because this is as of 2019, around about 24.18 million US dollars. In terms of environment, we've accessed resources from the GEF, GCF, the African Development Bank, many other multilateral organizations, and funds that amount to around about 233.2 million US dollars. From the water sector, again, this is 2019. I know that there are a number of others that have happened between 2019 and now, coming close to about 38 million US dollars. In the agricultural sector, this is one of the areas where we first accessed GCF resources. We've had a number of funds that we have accessed through the GEF, as well as through the GCF. We have a project called the Strengthening Climate Resilience for Agroecological Regions 1 and 2 in the agricultural sector, which is worth about 32 million US dollars from the GCF funding. In the energy sector, we do have quite a number of projects that are running, and some have been completed, some are still running. We do have the Get Fit projects, the Electricity Services Access Program.
Aurelius.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're running out of time, and I want to give participants a chance to maybe ask you a couple of questions, because what you're telling us is very interesting. So if maybe you can wrap up, and then we can open the floor for people who are able to stay 5 more minutes to ask questions to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, I've already talked about GCF resources. Of course, we do also have a pipeline from the adaptation fund. In this case, we are trying to access readiness funds. We've already accessed some readiness funds for an institution that we are trying to accredit, in this case, the Zambia Industrial Commercial Bank. We have already received funding for readiness purposes to accredit an institution to the adaptation fund. So in the last slide, which is basically looking at some of the key milestones, which I've already alluded to, we did launch the Green Bond Guidelines. We are in the process of developing our National Climate Change Fund, which has been enshrined in the Climate Change Bill. We are developing the Green Growth Strategy. We're in the process of developing our National Adaptation Plan. We have accredited 2 institutions so far with the GCF and received readiness funds for Zambia Industrial Commercial Bank to be accredited with the Adaptation Fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aurelius, and thank you for your presentation. I was aware that Zambia had a very long experience on climate finance, but hearing you, I realized I wasn't aware of the full spectrum. So thank you very much. I want to give anyone who has any question a chance to ask that question to Aurelius, and I have Manuel. Manuel, go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Aurelius, for your wonderful presentation. I really enjoy it. Maybe just a quick question. You mentioned in your presentation that that the main reason why African countries are not in the position to access GCF funding is because of capacity. But it seems as if the story in Zambia is quite different, because you have this different I mean, in your presentation, I see you have access in different funding. I just wish to find out, what is Zambia doing different that other African countries are not doing? Or is Gambia also in the same situation like other African countries?
I must say that we are actually also in the same situation, but we are trying as much as possible to leverage on different sources rather than the GCF alone. For example, we have pushed the pipelines through the climate investment funds. We have pushed pipelines through the World Bank and the African Development Bank. We have also pushed pipelines through different multilateral, rather bilateral engagements. For example, just a few days ago, we were launching a project through the German government, which is supporting preparedness for Article 6 cooperation, which is one of the kinds. Of course, it's a project that is being implemented in 4 countries. Zambia is one of is the only African country so far that is part of that project. It's a project worth 22 million euros. And as a country will be most likely be accessing roughly around about 4.5 for purposes of preparedness in the Article 6 transactions. Remember, this is to prepare us to access even other resources in the carbon markets. So basically, this project is there to ensure that we are ready as a country. We are prepared in terms of capacity building with regards to preparation of carbon market projects. We also ensure that we've worked quite a lot with the private sector in this country. We work quite closely with the commercial banks. Remember, I know I highlighted the fact that we have 2 commercial banks so far that are interested to be. One of them is already accredited with the GCF. The other one, we did receive financing from the Adaptation Fund to accredit them as a direct, implement, or rather direct access entity for the Adaptation Fund. This is the Zambia Integration Industrial Commercial Bank. So this has quite, helped a lot in terms of trying to access some of the resources. The other important point is the strong political will that we have as a country. We do have quite a lot of strong political will, I must say, that our leaders are pushing in terms of interacting with the different political players. And also this has opened a number of doors for us as a country. This is why you might see that maybe we are seeing different sources opening up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aurelius. And thank you everyone who's been staying for a couple of extra minutes. Maybe Aurelius, there's a question in the chat around the barriers to access climate finance. You've told us very much about how you have overcome those barriers. Are there any barriers that you have not been able to overcome or that you have found that are particularly difficult to do so?
Yes, one of them is, remember I talked about the aspect of the climate rationale for purposes of accessing mostly GCF resources. But then for you to develop or come up with this climate rationale, you would need data. So data has also been quite a challenge in terms of data generation, data collection itself, and just to produce evidence that would then, be linked to some of the projects that we'd want to implement. Because for you to come up with a clear climate rationale, it needs to be backed by evidence. In this case, this evidence would then come from the data that is available. So for in terms of some of the challenges, those are the major ones that we've experienced as a country. But also the slow turnaround from the GCF. At times, by the time you get feedback, the whole entire landscape would have changed. You would have to do a new proposal altogether. So this has also been quite a huge challenge in terms of the slow movement in terms of financing. But I also must make mention that we do have a climate finance advisor for Zambia. This is with support from the Commonwealth. There's a climate finance advisor who's been deployed to Zambia, and this has quite, helped a lot. I, for one, I will be leaving, and I'm actually preparing to go to Seychelles as a climate finance advisor for Seychelles. So this process has actually helped a lot, in the sense that, because this is someone who will then be dedicated towards, because at times it's us from the government side, we are bombarded with a number of works and activities that we need to do to ensure that works are moving within the government machinery. And then hence, at times, time to concentrate becomes a challenge, and hence you find this slowing down some of the processes. But then if you have dedicated experts that are deployed in these countries that need to access resources, it then makes things a bit easier, because they get to follow up, they get to address the comments that are coming, and it quite helps a lot. So for us, it has helped us to access a bit of some resources.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer, Aurelius. And thank you, everyone. We know that a couple of people have had to leave, but thank you to the rest of you that have managed to stay with us for those extra 10 minutes. Thank you again to Aurelius and Maciel for your presentations. We very much look forward to sharing this recording and the presentation materials with the rest of the partners as well. And we will make sure to invite the rest of Impulsouth stakeholders to our next South-South conversation in the following months. So thank you, everyone, and to everyone, have a good day, good afternoon, and good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, thanks.
Thank you, Aurelius.